Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm not sure anyone will believe me, but I have to tell this, because sometimes when I'm alone, I feel like I'm the only real person in a world full of fakes, and that horror is so much worse than any monster under the bed. It all started with a headache. It was a dull, aching pain that had settled behind my right eye and wouldn't go away for weeks. My doctor, finding nothing obvious, gave up and wrote me a referral for a head MRI, just to rule out anything serious, he said cheerfully. I found a clinic in the suburbs that could take me late in the evening so I wouldn't have to miss work. The name was something forgettable. East Creek Radiology or something like that. The clinic itself looked tired. The walls were dingy beige, the posters of human anatomy were faded, and the smell of antiseptic mingled with the smell of dust. I was greeted by a technician, a young guy with tired eyes who seemed to want to finish his shift as quickly as possible. He led me to the room with the enormous MRI machine, a white tunnel that promised claustrophobia and deafening noise. The procedure was as unpleasant as I had expected. I lay on a narrow platform, the head fixed in a plastic cage. The platform slid slowly into the tunnel. It was tight and cold. Then it began. A low hum escalated into a series of deafening rhythmic bangs, like an industrial hammer. Bang, dank, bang, bzzz. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on my breathing. The technician said it would last about 30 minutes. 30 minutes in a loud, cramped tube. And then, somewhere in the middle of the procedure, something strange happened. Along with the usual impacts, I felt a faint, high-frequency vibration pass through my head. It wasn't painful, but it was wrong, like a discharge of static electricity deep inside my brain. For a moment, a greenish light flashed before my closed eyes, and the rhythmic banging of the machine seemed to skip a beat, missing a single impact. Then everything returned to normal. When the platform slid out of the tunnel, I felt slightly dizzy. "Everything okay?" the technician asked, helping me sit up. "I think so," I replied. There was a weird vibration in the middle of it. He just shrugged. "Old machine. Does that sometimes. Don't worry about it." I didn't argue. I just wanted to go home. Back home, I drank a glass of water and collapsed onto my bed. For the first time in weeks, my head didn't hurt. I felt an incredible sense of relief and quickly fell asleep. The problems started the next morning. They were small, so small that any normal person would have written them off as fatigue or inattentiveness. I picked up my favorite mug to pour some coffee. It had the words "World's Best Programmer" on it, but that morning I noticed the text was mirrored. I turned the mug in my hands, blinking. I was sure it had been normal yesterday. Maybe I just never noticed before, I thought, though some part of my brain protested. Then, as I was leaving my bedroom, I reached for the light switch to the right of the door, but my hand met empty air. The switch was on the left. I froze for a second. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years. I knew where every switch was. Maybe I wasn't fully awake yet. I tried to find a logical explanation, but there was none. I just shrugged and left for work. Throughout the day, the strange things continued. The logo on my work computer mouse, which had always been blue, was now green. A colleague who always wore glasses came in without them. "Got laser surgery last month," he said when I asked. But I was sure I had seen him wearing glasses just last week. Each little thing was like a pebble in my shoe. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they were starting to rub my consciousness raw. The worst part happened that evening while I was watching the news. The report was about a famous senator who had died last year, but the anchor was talking about him as if he were alive and well and even running for another term. I stared at the screen. It was impossible. I remembered his funeral. I remembered the obituaries. I grabbed my phone and started searching online. Every article, all the news, confirmed it. The senator was alive. There was no mention of his death. Panic seized me. What was happening to me? Amnesia? Psychosis? Maybe I had a brain tumor that the MRI missed. I started to doubt every single one of my memories. The world I knew was beginning to dissolve, replaced with this new, subtly different version. I decided to call the radiology clinic. Maybe they knew something about the side effects of their old machine. I found the number in my call history. An automated voice informed me, "The number you have dialed does not exist." I tried again, same result. I found their website in my browser history. The link was broken. Page not found. A cold dread crept up my spine. The next morning, a Saturday, I got in my car and drove to the clinic's address. I remembered the way perfectly. I parked in the same spot. But instead of the small brick building with the sign East Creek Radiology, a large abandoned warehouse stood before me. Its windows were boarded up, and the paint on its walls was peeling, revealing brick that was dark with age. It was obvious this building had been standing here for decades. There was no trace of the clinic. It had simply vanished. I sat in my car, staring at the warehouse, and I finally understood. And the truth was far more terrifying than any illness. The problem wasn't with my memory. The world hadn't changed. I had. That strange vibration, that flash of green light in the MRI machine. It wasn't a malfunction. The machine didn't break. It worked. But it didn't do what it was supposed to. It didn't just scan my brain. It rebooted my consciousness. It didn't damage me. It moved me into this new reality, almost identical to my old one, but with small, illogical errors. A world where mugs are mirrored, light switches are on the wrong wall, and dead senators run for office. I am the only one. I am the anomaly, a ghost from a world that, for everyone else, never existed. I don't know if I can go back. I don't know how many of these almost identical realities there are. And the most terrifying question that keeps me up at night is, what if the next time I encounter some strong magnetic field, I shift again to a world that is even more different, or to a world where I don't even exist? My headache is gone, but in its place is a new pain, an existential terror, because I'm living in a world that is not my home, and I can never go back.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I want to tell you about photographs, about how the warmest, happiest memories of my childhood turned into the source of my greatest horror. And it's all because of something I noticed in the background. My grandparents passed away last spring, within a few months of each other. They left me their old, large house in a quiet suburb in Ohio. It was the house where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. Every room, every object was filled with memories. My task was to sort through their belongings, sell some things, keep some for remembrance. It was a sad but necessary job. I saved the attic for last. It was like a museum of the past. Old furniture under white sheets, boxes of clothes smelling of mothballs, stacks of yellowed magazines, and in the very corner, under a thick layer of dust, I found it. An old Kodak slide projector and a large cardboard box filled with dozens of round carousels for slides. My grandfather had been an avid amateur photographer. He had documented every moment of our lives. That night, I decided to have a nostalgia evening. I brought the projector down to the living room, set up the old screen I found with it. I made myself a cup of tea, turned off the lights, and inserted the first carousel. It was labeled 1968-1972. The mechanical clack whir of the projector transported me to the past. The first few slides were beautiful. Young Grandma and Grandpa at a picnic, my father, just a boy, holding up a fish, the sunny, slightly faded colors of the 60s. I smiled, remembering their stories about those days. Then a slide came up from a 4th of July celebration in the backyard. The whole family was gathered round the grill, happy faces. And that's when I saw it for the first time. Far in the background, near the fence, in the shadow of a large oak tree, stood a figure. It was blurry, out of focus, just a dark silhouette. I assumed it was a neighbor who had accidentally gotten in the shot. I thought nothing of it and continued the slideshow. I put in the next carousel, 1975-1979, more family holidays, trips to the lake, and there it was again, a slide from a Christmas morning, the family opening presents by the tree. And in the background, standing in a dark doorway leading to the hall, was the same figure. It was still a bit blurry, but now I could tell it was tall and very thin. My nostalgic smile vanished. I started to feel uneasy. Sitting alone in the large, quiet house looking at this felt strange. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe it was a distant relative I didn't recognize. Although why was he always standing in the shadows away from everyone else? I took the third carousel, 1983-1987. This was my own childhood. There was my 5th birthday party. I'm at the table with a cake, surrounded by my friends, and outside the window, looking into the room, it stood. The figure was clearer now, a masculine silhouette in dark, simple clothes. The face was still impossible to see, hidden deep in shadow, as if it were wearing a wide-brimmed hat, though there was no hat, and it was closer, much closer than in the previous photos. A chill ran down my spine. This no longer felt like a coincidence. I felt my heart start to beat faster. I began frantically clicking through the slides, carousel after carousel. I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking for it. And I found it. Not in every slide, but once or twice per carousel, per decade. In a photo from my aunt's wedding, it stood in the crowd of guests, but was the only one not looking at the couple. In a photo from my father's graduation, it stood on the other side of the street, always there, a silent, still observer. And with each decade, with each new photo, it got a little closer, a little clearer. Horror slowly filled the room. These happy, carefree moments of my life, of my past, were now poisoned. They were a lie. We had never been alone. Something had always been there, watching, unnoticed. What was it? A ghost? Or something worse? The silence of the house began to press in on me. Every creak of the old floorboards made me jump. I got to the last carousel, labeled in my grandfather's shaky hand, 2015-2018. These were some of the last photos ever taken. I inserted it into the projector, my hands trembling. Clack, whir, first slide. Grandma and Grandpa in the garden. No one. Clack, whir, second slide. Grandma baking her famous apple pie. No one. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was gone. Clack, whir. The third slide. The image lit up the screen. It was the living room, this very room I was sitting in. My grandparents were on the couch, smiling, and standing directly behind my grandfather's armchair, where my own desk now stood, was the figure. It was in perfect focus, crystal clear, tall, thin, in a black suit that seemed out of date, and this time I could see its face, or rather the lack of one. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, dark void that seemed to absorb the light. And that void, that head, was slightly turned. It wasn't looking at my grandparents. It was looking slightly to the side, directly at whoever was taking the photo, directly at the future me. I would have screamed, but only a croak escaped my throat. I was paralyzed, staring at this nightmarish image on the screen, and in that moment of dead silence, I heard it. A slow, long creak from a floorboard on the second floor, directly above my head.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm a night guard at a large automated warehouse on the outskirts of Denver. And I want to tell you about loneliness. About how the absolute absence of people can be more maddening than any crowd. The warehouse is a gigantic cave-like space, the size of several football fields. During the day, it's bustling with life. Forklifts roar, workers hurry about, but my shift starts at 10 p.m. when the last person goes home. From that moment until 6 a.m., I am the only living soul in this metal kingdom. My job is simple. I sit in a small glass-walled control room with a view of the entire warehouse. Dozens of monitors show feeds from the security cameras. Once an hour, I have to do a patrol. All the other work is automated. Along the rows of towering shelves, robotic sorters move silently, like metal spiders rearranging boxes. For the first few months, I liked the job. It was quiet, peaceful, no one breathing down my neck. I could read, listen to podcasts. With thousands of cameras, hundreds of motion sensors, and a complex security system, this place was one of the safest spots in the city. Or so I thought. It started with the motion sensors. Sometimes, looking at the warehouse schematic on the main monitor, I would see the red light of a sensor flash for a second in some distant aisle where there were no robots. The first few times, I'd rewind the camera footage for that sector. Empty. No movement. I wrote it off as a glitch. Maybe some dust fell or an insect flew by. Nothing to worry about. But it started happening more often. Always in different places. Aisle C12, then D5, then A21. Always on the periphery, where the active robots weren't. And every time I checked the cameras, nothing. It started to unsettle me. It was a riddle with no solution. Then, the camera problems began. The feed on one of the monitors would sometimes freeze for a moment. It would get stuck on a single frame for a second, then resume. Technical issue again. But it always happened on the camera in the sector where a motion sensor had just been triggered. And in that frozen frame, I started to imagine things. It was hard to describe. It wasn't a clear figure. It was more of a distortion. As if for a split second the camera lens was covered in a strange shimmer, like heat haze. Or a blurry, dark spot would appear in the corner of the frame, disappearing as soon as the feed unfroze. My rational mind screamed at me that these were video compression artifacts, a camera sensor glitch, anything. But my intuition screamed otherwise. The fear didn't come all at once. It seeped in slowly. My patrols turned into torture. Every time I walked down the long, echoing corridors, lit by the cold glow of fluorescent lamps, I felt like I was being watched. Not from the windows, but from the cameras. I could feel their glass eyes on my back. I started talking to myself, just to break the oppressive silence. The silent robots gliding past in the semi-darkness began to seem sinister. I stopped listening to podcasts. I would sit in my control room in complete silence, staring at the monitors, trying to catch it, to catch whatever was tripping the sensors and making the cameras freeze. And one night, I almost did. The sensor in aisle F9 went off. The camera froze for a split second. And in that frozen frame, at the very end of the aisle, I saw it. It wasn't a distortion. It was a clear, though distant, figure. It was dark and seemed to absorb the light, and it was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. My heart stopped. With trembling fingers, I started rewinding the footage frame by frame. Here was the normal, empty aisle. The next frame, it's already frozen, and the figure is in it. And the very next frame, right after it unfreezes, the aisle is empty again. It existed only in that single, anomalous second. I printed out the frame. I stared at it for hours. It was undeniable proof that I wasn't going crazy, but who would believe me? I showed the printout to the day shift supervisor. He laughed. "Looks like a smudge on the lens, Ryan. You're spending too much time alone." He was right about the loneliness. It was driving me mad. Or maybe it was making me more receptive. The climax happened last week. I was sitting at the monitors when suddenly all the screens except one went black. Only one remained, showing the feed from the camera directly above the door to my own control room. I tried to reboot the system. No response. And on that single screen, I saw it appear, right in the middle of the hallway in front of my glass wall. At first, it was a faint distortion, and then it slowly materialized. Dark, tall, with no facial features. It stood there, watching me. I was in a glass fishbowl, and it was outside. I froze, paralyzed with fear. It slowly raised a hand, and at that moment, scratches began to appear on the glass wall in front of me. Deep, wide gashes, cutting into the glass with a horrific scraping sound, even though its hand wasn't touching the surface. And then I understood. It wasn't outside, it was a projection. I looked at the monitor. The creature on the screen was making the same movements, but its hand on the screen was touching the camera, which was 10 feet away from me. But the scratches were appearing on the glass I was sitting behind. The line between the real world and what the camera showed had vanished. What happened on the screens was happening to me. I don't remember how I survived until morning. When the day shift arrived, the screens were working normally. There were no scratches on the glass. But I know what I saw. I quit that same day. I don't know what it was. A digital ghost living in the security system, or did the warehouse itself, that huge empty building, give birth to some kind of consciousness? Or maybe it was my own loneliness, which had found a way to materialize. I don't know. But I know one thing. Sometimes when I walk past a security camera on the street, I can feel its glass eye on my back, and I feel like for a split second, the image in some store window behind me freezes.